So we have public comments, and I'd like to welcome all of the folks, the community people here. This is great to have so many wonderful community people come to our meetings. This is a special meeting. We have two topics to discuss, as you can see from the agenda. One is after public comments, and the other one is about the reduction of certain kinds of certificated services. So we do have some translation devices here that we just purchased. I'm really excited that we're able to acquire those. So that, all right, so it's PTA. Very excited that we are able to acquire those so that those of us in the community that don't speak English can understand what's being said in the board.
And we have a translator. And we have a translator.
And we have a translator. Yes.
Welcome.
And if the board please speak up.
Dave?
Okay.
So I have to hear my own voice.
Okay. I'll do my best. My best teacher voice. Okay. So we have two speakers, and I just want to remind everybody, this is not a meeting where we're going to be making any decisions except the decision about the employees. This is not going to be a decision about whether we're going to close any schools or move any part of the district office. It's going to be a discussion about everything or as many things as we can discuss about the 7-11 committee's findings and their recommendations to the board. As you guys probably know, the board must do two things. Their primary job is to do two things. One is to make sure that that the school district provides the most efficient and best possible education for the students that are enrolled in our schools. That's our primary goal. We want everyone to be well prepared to be citizens of the 21st century by the time they graduate from our high school. So it takes all of us to work on that. The board, the teachers, from kindergarten all the way through the teachers of the students in the 12th grade. So we all work together on this. And parents, of course, also. Parents are a very important aspect of this effort. And it's definitely, what is it that takes a village or something like that? We're here. So the other responsibility of the school board is to keep the district in fiscal health, which is not easy. Trust me. I have been on the board since 2004 and have seen some horrendous cuts in our staffing. We have been able to fund our assistant superintendent of curriculum. So we don't have one of those, which most school districts have. And that's a very serious thing for our teachers. That helps provide staff development and teacher training and new curriculum. We do not have a superintendent of special education. We have a director of special education, so that's actually a part-time job now. We don't have a lot of the people in our financial office that we used to have. We don't have our secretaries in the schools. Chuck, you want to raise your hand and let everybody know what you do? Our main groundskeeper there. We don't have groundskeepers at each of the schools. We've had to cut custodial staff. And our teachers are overloaded. We have had to cut the teaching staff so that class sizes have increased. And all of this is because we have this fiscal responsibility. And I think librarians, computer technicians. So it is spread across the board. And it's very, very discouraging to us and to myself in particular, because I've been here since 1985 and I've seen it all, and it's really broken my heart in a lot of ways. Anyway, so that's what the school board does. And I'm going to call first on, anybody else want to add anything? So I'm going to call on Craig Andrews first. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you. I appreciate a quick minute of your valuable time. I'm a teacher at Nordoff High School. We teachers have been hearing and reading about the issue of closing schools. So far, the faculty has not reached unanimity in its position. But I want to be a voice actually for closing some of the schools that are underutilized. Consider this analogy. If General Motors over the course of 15 years found itself selling half the cars it once did, would the company need to close some assembly plants and lay off some plant managers, consolidating its resources? If it failed to do so and then suffered dire financial straits, would not intelligent observers say that its business model was broken? So yes, there would be much public outcry wherever a plant was closed. But to keep the company solvent, there would be no choice. This is precisely the situation OUSD faces. What the district needs is strong leadership, a willingness to do what is right, despite the decisions on popularity. The popular will is not always synonymous with what is best. Strong leaders do what needs to be done for tomorrow and plan for the long term, being proactive, not just reacting to the predictable pattern of our ever-decreasing enrollment. We knew 12 years ago that our enrollment was decreasing and would continue to decrease. Yet past OUSD leadership kicked the can down the road. Continuing to do so will create a true nightmare for your successors 10 or 15 years from now. Such shall be the legacy you leave behind. We need to consolidate facilities to make our teaching teams more flexible and efficient, to target Measure J funds more precisely, and to free wasted money needed to repair our languishing workers' salary schedule, which if allowed further stagnation will make it difficult to recruit highly qualified staffers in the future and will surely cause labor unrest with the current faculty. I believe that each of you know what the right thing to do is. And the question is whether you have the political will to do it. Thank you very much for hearing my opinion.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Andrews?
What do you teach?
English.
How many years have you been here with the district?
24.
Okay, so you've seen the rise and fall of student
Yes.
attendance.
And I do have lots of sympathy for, I know a lot of the varying opinions, but this is my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you for teaching my children, and thanks for your comments.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Dimitri Corbin is next.
Good evening, everyone. Good to be before you again. I'm here, can't help but comment on things, because being on the 7-Eleven committee, I have to reiterate what we were directed to, is we have to do everything in our power, if possible, before we think about closing schools. So on that end, everything I can do is try to revive an old theater education program that went by the wayside during all of these times, and that was the high school internship program that was with the former Ojai Shakespeare Festival that really catered to the Nordhoff High School students. I teach 4th, 5th, 6th grade, so I watch the students that I teach move on, and there is nothing there at the high school level for them to go and proceed with what I taught them. So this year, actually I started last year, to revive the Shakespeare Festival with the Ojai Summer Shakespeare Festival. So with the help and assistance of the Ojai Recreation Department to start this festival. So coming up on May 7th and 8th and May 14th and 15th, we have open auditions that will be at the Ojai Parks and Rec. We will keep auditions open through May, and what I'm doing is raising funds so that this program for the interns, which will be Macbeth, it's funded so that it is accessible to those who need it most. As I said before, Peachtree works with at-risk youth. So anybody this summer who doesn't have anything to do and want to get into some trouble, come and sign up for this program and audition, spread the word, and hopefully this will be the first step in reviving what the community really misses, which is a local, annual Shakespeare Festival. And this is a program that was lost from the education system because of cuts. So I ask you to support this. Oh, May 21st at Ojai Art Center, there will be a fundraising concert, Shakespeare and the Beatles, from 2 to 4 at the Ojai Art Center. And that day also at Ojai Recreation Department, there'll be an open house from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the afternoon on May 21st. So please come and support all of these programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Dimitri, where are you guys going to perform?
At the Libby Bowl.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I teach through the rec department, which gives me access to the Libby Bowl. So after all this time, they're helping to get this open. We just need people to sign up and say that there will be students. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, since we don't have any more public comments at this time, I'm going to move on to item 4.1. This is resolution 15-16-15. This is, we're asked to authorize the service of the final notice of non-reemployment or reduction to employees who were so noticed by March 15th and who waived the rights to a hearing. So Hank, do you have any comments?
Just very briefly, my goal every year, once I had any kind of chance to affect the goal, is to have 0 people on this list, therefore 0 people on the list on March 15th or slightly earlier. And actually, we achieved that last year and came quite close the year before. When I came here, the list was the year before had been 74 people. So we're now down to 8, about a little more than half full-time and some part-time. The purpose of tonight is to, unfortunately, affirm what I had to recommend at the early March meeting, and that is we just need more information about registrations and enrollments, registrations at the high school, enrollments in the elementary schools. We're pretty well set on the junior high for next year before I can say yay or nay to reemploying this small group of people. I'm quite sure that some, maybe most, will be offered an opportunity to come back, but we're just going to need some more time. The state doesn't give us more time after May 15th, and our board meeting is on May 17th, so that's why it's on the special meeting tonight. And I'm recommending that you give me the authority to contact these people to tell them that the original letter is still in place, but I'm also going to be communicating with each one individually and expressing some optimism that that can change after tonight.
Is there any questions for Dr. Banker?
I do, just a quick question I hadn't thought of. So you said some part-time, some full-time.
Right.
Because that wasn't my question. It seemed like you mentioned the decrease in enrollment at the elementary level, but it seemed like there was more teachers.
We have a couple.
noticed.
We have a couple in the secondary. One person who is tenured actually at 60%, but this year was working 80%, and next year might go back to 60%. And if you have a reduction in the assignment in the given year, you need to give that person notice. We also have a 20% elementary teacher who's given notice that she might not receive that 20%. Most of the elementary people that I've spoken more to you about, those are the full-time people.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion to approve this? Second?
Second.
Any other questions at all? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Okay, the motion passes. All right, so we're going to move on to our main reason for being here tonight. That's our discussion of the findings of the 7-11 committee, and this is the initial analysis of moving the district office. We're going to start with that and our other operations from here to a lot of different places. So Andy, you want to walk us through that? You gave us a really form.
Is there any paperwork on this that's in the back?
Yeah, that was we sent that out yesterday. That's okay. Yeah. So maybe just before we start, Andy, I know this is I love when people say this. By the way, there are chairs in the front for those of you who are standing in the back. So we welcome you here. And I just one other comment before we get into all these details. It's great to see a number of people from Miners Oaks with whom Thane and I met last Wednesday. Welcome back again. And I would, Thane, as you may, probably don't know, but Thane is pretty fluent in Spanish, and not quite at Anika's level, or Salvador, yeah, I know Salvador. So Anika Forrester and Salvador Rivera have been fabulous leaders of this group. Susie Taylor is here to represent the parents, but probably 6 or 8 of you who were there with us last Wednesday are here. We welcome you. Thane and I spent time talking about whatever that group wanted to talk about. And we spent finally probably close to an hour and a half plus. It was a great meeting. I look forward to any more that you'd like to have. And so, however, there are a number of people here tonight who are not here from the miners' community, which is good to see too. So that'd be my introduction. I'll just say one more thing, that the reason we're doing this tonight may be obvious, but for those of you who've read the 7-Eleven committee report, you know that the initial and very strong recommendation from the committee in the context of reviewing all the data and issues surrounding the elementary school sites use was to move forward with what was a 2012 recommendation of the prior 7-Eleven committee to have the board strongly consider moving operations, some or all of the operations from here to other places. And I would just say that to you all, because some of you heard this before, but very briefly, I know sometimes it seems that a year, 2, 3, or in this case 4 years after a recommendation was made and then nothing happened, that actually nothing was done. That's not true at all. Okay, I can tell you that I spent probably 20, 30 hours over the course of the 6 months after March of 2012 with real estate agents trying to get a sense of their view of how intelligent or not it was to try to put this property on the market. And for those of you who were trying to sell a house back in 2012 or 13 or 14, or just followed the market, you know that at best they were talking about 60 cents on the dollar. So here we are now, I think maybe fortuitously, 4 years later, with a committee re-upping that recommendation in a much stronger real estate market. That doesn't mean that we should just rush to sell, or, as the board has already said, not sell, potentially lease, but certainly, you know, we did the right thing in hindsight, it would appear. And now the time has come to seriously analyze what it would take to move all or some of the operations here elsewhere. And that's what the report tonight, if you didn't already get a copy of it, please grab a copy. If we ran out, I don't know if we did, but we can certainly make more of Andy's report, and then my report will take on a different subject about the use of the 5 schools. So
These are on the website.
right, everything's on the website.
And they have been translated into Spanish, and they will be on the website.
Andy's is, which is the one with all the words in it.
Yeah.
Okay, mine will be, but mostly it's a bunch of numbers. So, but there's some words there too. So we just had so much time between the completion of the report, which was yesterday, and getting it translated, which is today. Okay, so Andy.
Sure. So I'll briefly say, wearing my 7-Eleven committee hat, that my perception of the 7-Eleven committee's strong recommendation toward acting on this site prior to considering a school closure is the emphasis that school closure took around financials of the district. And so a lot of the committee members felt that one of the primary drivers was either operational savings on an annual basis from a school closure or Measure J savings. And I feel like, at least, and it was part of where my vote stemmed from, as well as where I think that our committee members' vote was coming from, was prior to doing something like closing a school, let's make sure that we are maximizing all other revenue sources. Let's make sure that we are looking at other opportunities that can benefit the district financially that don't include school closure. So what I wanted to look at here, and what I ended up doing in the, sorry for 9 pretty dense pages, was actually ask each of the directors or department heads, program heads of programs that are offered or run through the district office, what it would take to actually move their facilities elsewhere, what their actual physical requirements would be, and what kind of timing restrictions there might be around a move throughout the year. So jumping right to the end, I'll tell you that we can operate the district office on other sites. It would have to be multiple sites. If we are keeping all of our schools open, we would not have sufficient space at a single school site to move everything that's currently here. If we do maintain all school sites open, though, we would be able to decentralize a bit and house the offices across the district. The biggest physical requirement and potentially largest cost would be around the MOT department. We do need, and as you saw in the notes here, actually a garage that would house a 72-passenger bus, so our mechanic can work on it out of the elements, and so that we have the ability to maintain potentially a downed vehicle for multiple days, despite what the weather may be. But we do not currently have a physical structure that would be able to serve that role if we were to move off this site. Some of the other physical requirements around MOT would be, again, really around vehicle storage and around parts and tool storage. But MOT has the most significant physical space requirements.
Do we still pump gas from here?
We do, that as well. So from a physical space standpoint, we have the ability to move, business office, HR, the superintendent's wing, special education, again, would be decentralized. And so in addition to just the physical or the financial cost of making space ready, which we currently would not have ready space, making space ready for the operations to be moved, we would also be losing out on some of the efficiencies that come from having shared secretaries and administrative assistants across multiple departments like we currently have with MOT, IT, and nutrition services sharing a single administrative assistant. So if we were looking at decentralizing, then there could be an increased personnel cost as well. We would lose out on the potential, right now IT and MOT have, or the M and the O side have great synergies that just are working 10 feet away from each other, and the communication they're able to bring to a number of projects that cross over between technology or infrastructure upgrade with the actual maintenance and operations departments. So some of those non-financial costs also would be a part. But again, the big overarching statement I want to make sure is understood that we could make it happen. There would just be a financial cost to it, as well as we'd be, there's other factors that certainly go into it. So I can certainly go through some of the highlights of some different departments, but want to open it up if there were any questions at this point.
Andy, when you're talking about MOT,
Sure.
obviously there's a lot of square footage out there and a lot of hazardous substance issues, remediation issues, et cetera, right?
Right.
But I didn't see anything in here because I know the city has a lot and it has its own equipment. And has there been any consideration to partnering with the city or doubling up on city facilities? Is there capacity to do that?
So I do believe that would be our best option, would be to try to partner with the city or with Caltrans that also has their lot down near Bonds. So I absolutely agree that we would want to pursue that. My understanding, I've heard that some of those discussions have occurred in the past, but we have not begun those again.
Okay, and to our knowledge, we don't know if there's actual capacity to
correct.
take us.
I just say chronologically, Mike, those conversations actually just preceded my coming. So when the board considered, and Linda was the only one on the board, in 2008 or so, when the board considered, Craig was talking before about the issue of potentially consolidating schools, that the whole question of moving here elsewhere was looked at. That issue was talked about in that context. The board, actually more administration, got far enough in the analysis to take a look at Building C at Nordhoff, which is the one that has the parking lot adjacent to it. So as you go A, B, C, and then you get to the softball field, it's right down there, okay? And I actually walked through it, but I was just sort of curious. It's not anywhere near close to office ready, and it hasn't been used really for anything of certainly sort of active consequence over the last number of years. But that ended in 2008, and concurrently, that was when the one proposal came to the school district, right? Right, and it was the one response to the RFQ that the district put out for potentially how this land might be used, right? And it's a public document. I've shared it. It's from Ted Moore, shared it with the city, shared it with anybody else who wanted to see it. And I've I've stayed in touch with Ted. He's the one person who's been consistently interested. I haven't talked to him recently,
I have
but...
that here if anybody wants to look.
Oh, there it
at
is. Thank you, Jane. I didn't know we had a prop. Okay, anyway, so, anyhow, so...
Carol Barrel.
Right there it is. You're welcome to it. And then since then, I've had overtures, what might be the wrong term, but not unlike overtures from some people who either do developing or know someone who does developing. And more recently, not surprisingly, there's been an uptick in those overtures because the market's better. Okay, so it's not coincidental. It's just more. So that's the history of that, and there were conversations, as I understand it, with the city, and then the Caltrans piece is I don't know how much Caltrans.
We did talk to them.
Did you do it? You did too? Okay.
We did
Okay.
talk to them, and we also, that was about the same time that the Honor Farm was turned into the Health of Ojai facility.
Oh.
So we also looked into possibly, potentially doing something there, having, bus storage, or, they don't have gas station there, but there might be a place for us to use, to move some things. They do have a really amazing kitchen, and actually we did tour the kitchen there to see how, if that was something that we could use, that we could move our food services department over there. Their kitchen is quite large because it was a jail, and they fed a lot of people. So it's a it's a really nice kitchen actually. So
But then you're talking about leasing.
we would be leasing it, right?
Whereas here, we
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
And Andy, one other thing before, because I know you're going to get other questions and there are details you want to get into here, but one of the things you and I talked about, I think maybe it comes under that context in the third to last sentence in the second paragraph, where you talk about financial and opportunity costs. Okay, now, part of the opportunity cost is the melding and synergy, right? Loss of that, moving. But another piece you and I talked about was if we move operations from here to, say, 3 or 4 elementary schools, or some elementary schools in Nordhoff, there's really no place to go in Matilaha, there would be different traffic, right? Both vehicular and personnel. Let me just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So first on the personnel side, currently having a separate facility where adults, whether or not they're vendors who are coming on site or parents of Ojai Valley Neighborhood for Learning children or others are coming onto the site. If we were to move to a school campus, we're talking now about a currently closed or secure campus having far more foot traffic on that site potentially. And so one option would be that we do really create a separate, fully fenced area of the district office, which again would be just additional cost of restricting some of the physical space that students would have access to on their school site. But otherwise, we would be looking at having a significant increase in public traffic, and again, potentially vendors or other business-related visitors to school campuses that currently they're not visiting. From the vehicular side, in addition to just our own traffic of vehicles, as well as our district-owned vehicles that would now be on sites, but if you're looking at, for instance, nutrition services that I detail a little bit in the first page, we would, if we were to follow the recommendation that the 7-Eleven committee made to move the nutrition service operations from the district office to Myers Oaks and have their dry and cold storage actually housed at Myers Oaks, you now are looking at a significant increase in truck, 18-wheelers even coming onto, having be onto the campus really, because right now we have a dock that's within 5 feet of the actual storage facility. It would be a significant increase in our personnel time, and it would require a full new warehouse employee if we were going to be having the deliveries made at the street stop. If we aren't able to bring the vehicles closer to where the storage would be, then that would be a significant increase in time for us. So assuming that there would be a dock that was close to where the cold storage was, then you're talking about, again, a significant increase in truck traffic having to come onto the campus, the noise of a truck idling for a while, and then also just the even noise of the storage, cold storage container itself, which is louder than you may think.
Does it make as much noise as a generator or
Louder.
louder?
yeah.
Okay.
Louder than this air conditioner?
I don't know if it's that loud.
Well, one of the things I noticed in your, on page 2 of your discussion about the food service department, you talked about how our units are 20-plus years old and that they don't meet the current health department standards. How long before they ding us and say, okay, you can't use these any longer, they're, I mean, we would have to replace them anyway. I'm just wondering about that.
We don't have a timeline or expectation that if we're maintaining them here that we'll need to replace them.
Okay.
If we do move, though, we absolutely would need
Yeah.
totally new units.
Okay.
So it's grandfathered, do you think?
I feel like this is an excellent start on the analysis, but we should note that this does not include any discussion of chaparral.
Right.
Also, on the discussion about the refrigeration, it says we would be able to accept the commodity from the Department of Defense, the produce. Do you have any idea of how much money that would save us if we were able to accept that?
I don't have that estimate, but I could provide that to you this week.
That might help offset some of the other costs that.
If I could just respond on chaparral. Right, it's not in here. There was a lot of conversation, though, at the 7-Eleven committee about chaparral. And I'll take a stab at representing the consensus. I'm sure I'm right on one piece, and that is that the committee in general did not see a logical coexistence between chaparral and an elementary school population at the same place, which I think makes sense, right? So, and remember, chaparral is for juniors and seniors, right? So it's not freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior. So you're talking about 17, 18-year-olds in a community of 5 to 11-year-olds, number one. They could be, the 60 or 50 most outstanding students or not, most well-behaved or not, and neither one of those applies completely to either the Nordhoff population or the chaparral population. In any case, that was one. The second piece of conversation was, what about Nordhoff? Possibility. Remember, students who are at chaparral are there because of credit deficiency. Okay, so you can pick up credits wherever you might be. And then the third possibility, which got just a little conversation, was to go back to the years of, 20 years ago, I can't put a number on it, but at some point chaparral operated out of buildings in the community, which it could. There's nothing about those 50 students or so, that's about the group we're talking about, that would require being on a sort of a school campus, even though this is, but it could be contiguous buildings, right? And not that many. There are only, I don't know how you count, about 7 classrooms or so. So those are the 3 things I heard. We just haven't gotten to that point yet.
Can I go back, Andy, to the nutrition services? Just to, I hate to throw a wrench in there, but if we're going to be spending money moving nutrition services, I'd love it to go to the high school, and we could do a program for, teaching chefs.
Culinary arts?
academy.
Culinary arts, yeah.
So I think that's a perfect idea. I just want to emphasize what we're talking about moving is only Suzanne Lugatoff, our director, potentially her administrative assistant, and then the actual warehouses where the food is stored. We're not talking about actual change in the way that any of the cafeterias are currently run or would run in the future. So Nordhoff would certainly still have its fully functioning kitchen. Myers Oaks would still have its fully functioning kitchen, and Myers Oaks would not be, if that were the location to receive the operation side, Suzanne, and then the warehouse storage, it wouldn't actually impact their operations of the cafeteria. It really is 2 separate parts of the program.
We've had that in the past. Christine Denny actually ran a really wonderful ROP program at Nordhoff, and it was very well received until she moved on to her Garlic Gold project.
But I think there was something in the Ventura paper recently about one of the culinary schools. I'll have to look for it.
Great.
Yeah.
You need to talk louder. our interpreters, not getting every word. Okay, so what else?
Dan, do you want to run through some of these?
Sure, so I'll talk about a few of the highlights. So we talked about nutrition. Again, the factors if we were going to be moving nutrition to a school site, potential increase in personnel cost with the administrative assistant, as well as with the warehouse, if that was going to be following with the nutrition director, as well as just factors of geographic location on a school site as to where we'd be able to have the ingress and egress of the trucks that are dropping off these deliveries. The increase in the need to make sure, again, we'd still maintain a presence here for the warehouse because we would still be collecting or receiving non-food items, presumably at wherever the district office main hub was. So we're looking at personnel cost, change in the storage needs, and then the actual infrastructure cost of building out the cold storage unit. Myers Oaks and actually none of our elementary school sites currently have the electricity infrastructure to house what would be required of the new cold storage unit, and so there would be some infrastructure changes on the electrical side. So moving over to IT. IT is a department that I think is most ready to potentially move off the site. In fact, we currently are exploring some options for them to move out of their current location in the district office. They do have the highest number of their quick closeout items or quick help desk requests do come from this site, due to the, again, 8 hours a day that most people who are working on this site are in front of a computer, just by nature more often that they're having various IT needs, help needs. But otherwise, they do have the ability to potentially be away from me and the superintendent's wing, as well as away from some of the other departments. So again, the easiest one that would be able to potentially move. There are some concerns about the impact on some of our IT. In fact, actually the filming that occurs here, if we were going to be moving the boardroom, there's only certain sites that actually currently have the ability to accept or send the feed. So some of those sorts of IT infrastructure changes would be required, but the actual department itself could potentially be housed on another site. And their physical space needs would be at minimum 1 classroom. Current size would allow them to have their 4 staff members in there and some storage. Their desire would actually be to be in a double classroom, to be able to offer some trainings in their office space as well. However, again, if space didn't allow it, then they could always offer trainings for staff in computer labs or libraries or cafeterias. So those are really the main points around IT.
Can I ask, how many employees are there in IT?
We have 4 now. We have a director, we have 2 network specialists, and a computer technician.
So other than their need for space for training, what kind of space do they need just for their day-to-day?
Day-to-day, they'd be fine in 1 single classroom. And
then also you and
Right.
Hank manage them as well, right?
Correct,
So
yeah.
if they were off on their own, it would be a lot harder for you to manage them. Certainly you wouldn't do it as easily as you do now.
That's absolutely correct. Right, so nutrition services and IT are the 2 departments that I directly manage that Suzanne and David and I all spoke, and we all agree that it can be done, that we'd be decentralized from each other, but certainly would make things more difficult. I do meet with David a couple times a week, Suzanne less frequently, but if we don't have that physical proximity, it would be a little bit more challenging, but again, certainly something that can be done.
Andy, in terms of the service requirements of the district office, do you have a sense of what that involves? Is that user issues? Is it hardware issues? What does a typical service call require?
I think I'll need to talk to David and
Okay.
actually let you know.
The reason I ask is that, any physical change tends to impact how you operate, right? And so I think we need to be cognizant that if we decentralize the district office, it will certainly change how you operate. I don't want us, though, to skew too much to the assumption, though, that the change will cost us a lot of money. As IT moves to the cloud, server racks become obsolete.
Right.
We don't need that space. Remote operation of computers should assist, right? A different way of doing it. So I would ask that as we go through this, we keep an open mind that even with the shared clerical support, cloud documents and other kinds of electronic communication ought to make that a little bit easier, even if everybody's not sitting in the same room. It's an overall note, but there is a tendency, I think, in this document to sort of assume the worst on the organizational side. So I would ask that we leave room for doing it differently, to make up for that change. Because clearly, I mean, remote supervision is more challenging, but there's ways to do that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, good, thanks.
There's also Skype meetings and, other ways of having meetings with your co-employees.
As you guys know, my former employer was Santa Barbara County Education Office, where we had 70 miles between our 2 offices, and so that was a geographic challenge that we made work.
Yeah.
Certainly, half a mile to 3 miles across this valley between our sites would not be nearly as challenging.
Yeah.
So any other questions on IT or nutrition before just switching over to HR?
I got one on the nutrition thing. Looks like this sort of makeshift building or the cooling unit, the cool storage. So that consists of a storage container with a air conditioner on it, right?
Correct.
But to do that properly, it couldn't be that expensive, right? Do you have any idea?
We don't have cost estimates yet, no.
We could probably get that from other school districts that are of similar size as ours, and how much they.
They're pretty, I mean, we've been pricing one, they're pretty expensive.
No, this is not refrigeration. This is just cool. So it has to be somewhere in the
Oh, okay.
45 to 70 degree.
Well, in the valley, that's
Yeah.
cooling.
Well, it definitely needs cooling.
Yeah.
Andy, before you go to HR, or as you get to HR, just explain, I'm pretty sure everybody here knows, but certainly our members of the audience wouldn't have any particular reason to know. Just explain what our HR department is, and who does what. And I just have to say, I'm smiling when you call it the superintendent's wing. Okay? There's sort of
what it says on
a connotation that it's like this, like airplane hangar or something. Okay, it's actually you and I, Kathy, and the 2 people you're going to talk about now. That's the wing.
Correct.
Okay, go.
In a hallway.
Our Human Resources Department has 2 coordinators, one on the classified side, one certificated. They actually, until recently, were housed in 2 separate parts of the district office, and that move occurred, is Joanne still in here?
2 years ago.
About 2 years ago or so. And speaking of how some change can really bring about some positive change, both our coordinator of classified and coordinator of certificated have absolutely glowing feedback at this point, while they both resisted a little bit initially, of the move to bring them together. Great synergies as they're doing so many things that overlap on the classified and certificate side. I directly supervise the coordinator of classified HR. Dr. Bangser is the coordinator or the supervisor for Jody, our certificate coordinator. And I work closely with Jody and Barbie both. So they have, just like Kathy, Hank, and myself, probably the least needs of these departments as far as space. They even said that they could potentially be working in the same office, although currently they have offices that adjoin one another. They could share a space if they had some room nearby for privacy when they occasionally do have conversations that require confidentiality. Otherwise, they really have some flexibility around space that they could potentially use. Their biggest space requirement is actually on the storage side. They store our personnel documents within their office if they're current employees, and then we also have archives here on the district office as well that they reference frequently. So in here we lay out what the storage needs are, but as far as space for their operations, it would be very important that they maintain in close proximity to myself as well as to the business office, because those are departments that are interacting dozens of times a day. A great intersection between our business office, our HR department, and myself and Hank.
But the storage could be even in a like a roll-off type thing, like, it doesn't have to be in a room, actual room, it just has to have access.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it would be
absolutely.
something that could be put onto a site.
How much of these files are susceptible to being digitized? Particularly the archive files.
I would, can't say. Could they be? They all could be. I just don't, I'm not well versed, and actually, the reason I was hesitating was because I figured you would know better than I, what things we legally could, which ones we have to actually maintain hard copy records at this point.
Right, but if they're digitized for daily use, your archives can be off-site in secured storage. You don't need daily access to, right? So because it
Okay, I'm
narrows
sorry, I
your
thought you were
paper.
saying as a replacement to maintaining the hard
You know,
copies.
well, that's a whole different question, the wet
Okay.
signatures and all that kind of thing. That's a legal question that even at work, we
Right.
haven't figured it out
Okay.
yet. But we're trying to get digital, and there's all, I mean, this is a paper operation, it sounds like.
Right.
And again, as you lose your footprint,
Right.
and as we modernize, right, I would hope that, again, we would be looking at different ways of doing what we do.
Sure.
And so networking, cloud availability, so people don't need to go to the file cabinets, all that kind of stuff. If this were to happen, I would hope that we would use it as an opportunity to refine our operations as well, not just move wholesale.
Right.
Okay.
Agreed.
Any other questions for Andy? A few people control a lot of paperwork, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Oh, HR, that's our
HR.
business, you
Yeah,
know?
really,
Our
because-
business is paper.
That is very- Just one addendum, you look at the second to last paragraph on that page. I'm looking at Marilyn, and so she's not under our wing, but we have actually 3 buildings here, right? So we have 3 operations. The 5 people I just told you about, then we have our intermediate section, which is described in the part of that second to last paragraph with Marilyn and Alicia involving first 5, and John Walker, who does work for our Personnel Commission. We've already talked about Chaparral. We didn't actually mention special education operations, which are here also, out there. Okay. It's here, but not part of the MOT conversation. So we have three things going on here. The superintendents, the group I just mentioned, and then Andy will talk a bit about the business office operations, which is the last one here on the way to the auditorium.
And what's APTG?
Place to grow?
Place to grow, the
Oh.
preschool.
Thank you.
Good question. Love acronyms.
So our business office currently is in what used to be 2 classrooms that now have been opened up internally, so they're able to move freely between the 2 rooms. We have a total of 7 staff members in the business office, 4 who currently have 4 shared desks and cubicles, and then our director has an office, and purchasing technician and student data specialist share some other space. That configuration, very fluid. The important thing would be that we have space for 7 desks, or 6 desks, 1 office, and sufficient storage. They also utilize the conference room, but again, assuming that the business office would be somewhere near the majority of the other operations on this side of the campus, that we would all be sharing the same conference room as we do now. The business office, as I was mentioning earlier, very important, they would remain close to HR as well as close to what I'll continue to call the superintendent's wing.
Can't believe you can afford a superintendent's wing, for God's sakes.
Time constraints on business office. As you can imagine, certainly during some of those budget cycles, budget season, it's very difficult. They were saying, though, that if it was only a few days that they were down, and it was at the beginning of the month, really any month could potentially work. So business office was pretty flexible around timing. Ideally, though, I think for the majority of the departments, beginning of summer being the initial period of beginning the move, works best for all the departments. So a summer move would be mandatory or required by some, and I'll get to a place to grow in a little bit. And then for others, like business office, it would just be preferable, but there's flexibility.
Can I ask a question as we go along? So is this property in any way subdivided? Or is it just one big
It
piece
is
of?
technically. It is technically. It's, I've seen a couple of different iterations. It's either 3 or 4 parcels. I recall 4. But that's a technical legal designation. And when we talked a bit with the city back a number of years ago, when we were doing the whole, not landmarking so much, but
The overlay.
the overlay process, right, for affordable housing, that's when we sort of got into that. Right? But I see no obstacle. I'm not a real estate attorney by any means, but I see no obstacle to doing something with 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the parcels.
Right, because it immediately comes to my mind when I think of a place to grow,
Yeah.
off in that corner, and you
Right.
think, maybe
Yeah.
that's spared.
Or, yes,
Or
maybe.
anything else might be.
Well, and
You know,
and
that's-
the one
makes
thing
sense.
without getting too fast over that issue, setting up a preschool is no small operation. I mean, there's some very significant legal, I'm sure Kathy, you know way better than I do, but there's some very significant legal, facility, and other standards that you need to meet, which we do there. I mean, it can be done some other place. I don't happen to have a place in mind right now, but you can't just, it's not just like, opening up another classroom in a school. There are a lot of things attached to it.
And as the report says, kindergarten play structures aren't appropriate for these much
Right.
smaller children. They're quite a bit smaller.
Right, and on that point, the estimate we've received is at least 6 weeks from the time that your facility is ready to accept students to when it actually will finalize in the certification process to be able to do so. So again, a place to grow really would be one that the move, in order to avoid an interruption during the school year, would need to begin the week after school gets out, and we'd be pushing it in August to make sure everything was signed off on and ready and certified to be able to open up for students in August. So MOT, I've talked about a little bit as far as some of the physical space requirements. I do believe that our best opportunity with moving transportation and the M&O side off the site would be to house the vehicles on some sort of shared space. If we could work something out with another entity. We have recently separated out MOT as a department. We are having it now, the transportation department is separate from the M&O side. We have a transportation supervisor that we're recruiting for right now, and then we have 2 district plant supervisors who oversee the maintenance and the operations side across the district. So there's no need that we'd be maintaining the MOT altogether at this point. We have the flexibility of housing offices for all staff in both departments on separate sites. If possible, keeping M&O offices together with the district supervisor or the plant supervisor would be ideal, but again, something that we could also have the maintenance building and its vehicle storage and tool storage separate from the supervisor's office or desk. So allow flexibility around where people are housed in these departments, but certainly just physical space needs for the equipment.
Exactly. It's a little overwhelming.
It's overwhelming, yeah, it is.
So we do have on page 2 of page 7 of the document, but the second page of MOT gives a little detail, or gives more details to the actual space requirements for some of the different departments, or for some of the different aspects of MOT.
Can we do a tour of this property?
Anytime.
Absolutely.
It actually won't take very long.
Well, I mean, I've seen the buses in
Yeah.
the back,
No, no,
I've been
sure.
to a place to grow.
Yeah, let
I've
them
been
do
to
that.
the
Let them do that. Sure, you bet.
superintendent wing, I've been to Chaparral, but I don't know if I've been in special ed, I don't know.
That won't take long. That's like in the door, office, out the door.
It's still just seeing it all together.
Yeah, together, but that's, because it is integrated.
The preschool is really a very wonderful place.
It's cool.
I mean,
I've been there, because I did
And-
that reading on Dr.
Yeah.
Seuss.
And a radically bigger, better program than before Sherry Candace took over.
She's done
I
an
mean,
amazing
at one point, we have to have just so you know, we have to have the program ages 3 through 5, right, for special education identified students. So we have that number. And the concept of the program legally and educationally always has been to have at least one non-special education identified student for each identified student. So at one point, it was sort of 8 and 8. And now, I haven't seen the most recent iteration, but we're well into double plus, maybe triple now almost, the number of non-special education students. So she's done a great job.
So special education, again, some space requirements that are outlined. The ability to separate out a little bit of special education. If possible, the goal would be to keep special education and a place to grow together, given that a place to grow does have that strong connection to the special education department. But not necessary. They could be housed separate from one another. But currently, a place to grow does utilize the occupational therapy space that's connected to the broader special education operations department back here. And so if they were not going to be together, then certainly occupational therapy, there would need to be an occupational therapy space with the preschool. And potentially a second space with the special education main department, or we would just, again, change how we're currently doing things, would have people going to the preschool for OT at all ages.
On page 12, just like some thoughts, which I thought were page 12. Yeah, this is under the special education heading. The idea of having an ROP program at Nordhoff for early childhood education.
Page 9.
Page 9.
Yeah. Oh, this is the one that I printed this one.
Oh, thanks.
In my computer, I'm sorry.
That's why I only got to 12. Okay, good. Thanks.
Okay, it's printed
We
out
were just seeing if we were
differently.
paying attention. I didn't.
Yeah, no.
What is ROP, remind me?
Regional Occupational Program. That's now called Career Technical Education. Same thing, but used to be called ROP.
So Sherry did provide a couple different options or considerations of other locations that we could be housed at, or that the program could be housed at. And she was saying Nordhoff could be a great opportunity to add a new career pathway of where we could have juniors and seniors potentially working with the students in the program and learning also about what it means to pursue a career in early childhood education or potentially teaching.
It could be really quite special. I know
That's true.
we had a preschool at Nordhoff years and years ago. Kim Hoy coordinated that, and it was wonderful. We had a very large group of Nordhoff students who worked with the kids, and it was really quite wonderful.
I agree
So,
completely.
anyway, so I think it's, that has a great thought. So there's all these people who want to be at Nordhoff now. All these groups. So, have to arm wrestle. Something like that. All right. Any other questions about the preschool or the early childhood, the place to grow, or any of?
Well, wild speculation. What are you thinking in terms of potential alternatives for Place to Grow?
Pure speculation.
Not even worth saying?
No, because of the special nature of the place. I've actually, my other superintendencies tried to figure that out. You know, how do you meet the licensing requirements in a place that's just a regular old place? You know, and it can be done, but it's not just the 6 weeks. It's way more than that to try to figure out the place and how parents of 3, 4, 5-year-olds who are challenged to begin with will feel comfortable coming and going. It can be done, but I really would rather not try that now.
And the Ojai Valley Neighborhood for Learning.
That's our First 5 program Alicia Hicks oversees. She currently has space in the building that Hank mentioned earlier that currently also
B.
has, yeah, it is, Building B. So she has an office space, and then she's able to utilize the facilities that we have around this campus to be able to have a lot of her programs. So she has parent education classes. They have a number, actually tonight, she's working with the Place to Grow on Dino Dig that's taking place up at the preschool right now as we speak. And has a lot of great offerings for, it's our First 5 program in the Valley, a lot of great offerings for families of younger children. The preference would be, I'm the fiscal agent and serve on the board, so she and I work closely together. If she could be near me again, that would be ideal. Certainly not a requirement if she was to be moved elsewhere. However, a Place to Grow, having close proximity to Place to Grow would be very helpful for that program because of how much, again, they overlap. They're together working on Safety Town this summer. And a lot of the offerings that Alicia offers necessitate that they have a playground or outdoor space that, again, qualifies for the age group that they're serving, and Place to Grow works out very well because they do have the appropriate age range of equipment.
All right. Lots to talk about. Any other questions about the district office facility? So obviously, these are not inexpensive activities to relocate, and with our limited funds, it means we'd be cutting into our budgets severely unless we could. I mean, obviously, we would, in my opinion, we would have to have some potential tenant who's ready to move in, perhaps in stages, as we, as the district office facilities move out, so that we would have some income that would help offset some of the costs that are going to be associated with the moves. I don't
Yes,
know.
I definitely agree. It's not we're doing this summer and we're all moving. It would have to be in stages with an idea of why we're moving. There is a purpose to moving because someone is coming in.
And that would provide revenue for the school district.
Yeah, it's hard to see doing this on the spec. There's a lot of expenses here. I would hope that if, this were all done as a package, that some considerations from the developer would assist us in that.
Yeah.
But I have to agree, this is a lot. Now, some of this I think can be looked into regardless, right? The MOT stuff, partnering with the city, and some of those other things could proceed.
Yeah.
But I think what's hitting me hardest is this last little piece. The special ed, the Place to Grow, the neighborhood for learning. This doesn't look real flexible to me. How much of the property, roughly percentage-wise, is this taking up now? The
Place to Grow?
special ed, Place to Grow, all
Small.
that?
Yeah, I couldn't put an acreage on it, but, you can see when you drive up Montgomery,
Yeah,
it's
just
at
the
the
corner.
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 And that's
Just what you see.
That's what you see, and then special education is a couple offices. The synergy and the physical relationship is really important, but if it could be duplicated elsewhere, forget even the relationship between special education and a Place to Grow. I mean, it'd be good to have it, but just a Place to Grow. Just the entity unto itself is a big challenge, and it's a legal requirement. And we must have a program for students, call them students to be, or ages 3 to 22, that's our responsibility. So the first 2 years, we have a responsibility to have a program for those students who have identified special education needs.
Well, it'd be interesting to look at, it seems like you've got maintenance, operations, transportation, Place to Grow, and special ed on that half of the campus.
True.
It would be interesting to look at this chaparral, the boardroom, IT, I don't know exactly where they are, but.
IT is currently back in the back with
In the
the
same
MOT. But
Of course, this is the more, this area is historical. Coverage.
Oh, and that too.
My input here is that we had a 7-Eleven committee study the advisability of leasing or selling this property. But the scope of that never was really to go into these details about what happens if we do move and where do we go. We had the recent 7-Eleven committee whose focus was on the elementary school properties, and they did an excellent job of going into great detail on the elementary school properties. It's been noted that there have been recommendations to move out of the district offices, but never by a committee that studied what it would take to move out of the district offices. And so, I'm really skeptical about doing that without really going, we've talked about a lot of things, but we haven't really talked about where we would put them. I think that we would have to do that, because I think in our minds, we've got, okay, well, this we could put in that location, then we clear the slate, well, this we could put in that location, clear the slate, this we could put in that location, you know, and we can't put them all in the same place, so that's number one. And then number two is we haven't even talked about chaparral, which is right in the heart of this property, and we would have to figure out a solution for that. Now, having said that, yes, we could move all of these things, but I go back to what has been said before, that I would be all for that if we had a reason to do it. And in the time I've been on the board, I haven't seen a real offer to do anything with this property by any developer or outside agency. I mean, there have been some overtures, as have been mentioned, but not a real, hey, this is, we'll give you this if you'll move. You know, show me the money, and then we can talk about it. I think that would be my approach. I think it's really important that we have this in our back pocket, so that if somebody came to us and said, we've got a deal for you, that we could immediately think, okay, well, this is, and they said, how much would it take for you to move? Then we would know. But I'm really concerned about the idea of, it was mentioned before, moving on spec. I don't think is a good idea for us in terms of the financial impact with all of the other financial needs that we have. Now, balancing that, I'm not all on one side on this because there will be costs to maintain these buildings so that we can stay here, which we wouldn't have if we left. So there's a trade-off there. Yeah, I've said enough for now.
Any other thoughts on this analysis here, which doesn't include financial costs? It just is like an overview, which is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Your staff has done a fabulous job of getting this information to us.
I do have I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I want to hear what you say, and then I'm going to amplify.
That makes smarter, right? Actually, I went looking for my file and I couldn't find it, so I was just wondering, and you may not have this at the top of your head, but do you know what the that list of repairs, you know, the $100 million list? What was allocated for this
Million plus?
facility?
Yeah, it's about 2 million.
A million plus, plus two.
So if we did nothing here, I mean, in that sense,
Right.
we'd free up about 2
Up
mil.
to two.
With soft cost.
But if we were to lease it, we would probably have to spend that money anyway
To move.
Well, not to move, but to get a tenant.
Well,
Yeah, or they might. I mean,
They might just
that's
do-
right. I think the whole issue of how you get from owning a property to leasing the property, you know, is so complex and so dependent on the person who comes forward. And I would just say, this is sort of an anticipatory set, you know, for the teachers in the audience, right? I know that goes back a few years, but there's still a concept of creating an anticipatory set for the class for the next day. So for you all, for 2 weeks from tonight, there will be an agenda item. I'll talk to Lynn about it, of course, and James, and we'll be meeting about it. But I think to keep the momentum going on this issue of proceeding on the key subjects raised by the 7-Eleven committee, I'd like to put an agenda item on the May 17th agenda that would give you all an opportunity in a more formal way, thinking about tonight and these reports, to say, okay, Hank, Andy, here's what we would like individually and maybe collectively we'd like to ask you to do about this subject of potentially finding someone to lease the property. You know, you put an ad in the paper. I mean, what are you going to do? There are lots of ways to do it. And I told you tonight, right, that I knew we'd get to this in some form. So what we'll do is we'll bring back that March 2015 conversation you had, which is now in the minutes from that meeting. That'll be part of the public record again. But I'd like to have you think about, you know, how aggressive do you want to be? What are some criteria that you want to attach to our moving forward? Okay, so that's, give you a couple of weeks to think about that. Because I think the time has come, just thinking what Craig said, it's the right time to move forward to, if we're going to be serious about opening up ourselves to potential initiatives from developers, I'd like, it's your school district, right? I'd like to get a real serious conversation completed about that. And I can tell you some things I've learned, which I've shared tonight a little bit. So, appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thoughts are that that while we can take this up a notch, so to speak, and ask one another what we would do next, I think that there's a bit of optimism in the idea that much will change. Because the truth is, as Thane said and others have said, you know, it's a pig in a poke, so to speak. You know, somebody says, well, would you potentially be interested in, well, yeah, potentially, but without knowing that you had resources, one, to fund substantial expenses to move, which would be a prerequisite, and then two, without knowing that this idea for the space would be compatible with the vision that other people in the city have, that would be consistent with ideas that we as a school district have, and that it would bring in enough money to offset the costs of moving. You know, it leaves one sort of in an indefinite state of maybe.
I can help you with the cost factor. Let's say, just for the heck of it, because I know what the ballpark initial cost might have been for moving these operations here, ABC, okay, to Building C at the high school. This is now 8 years ago. And Danny told me that it's not a complete figure, but let's call it, I'll up it by cost of living, and let's call it 400,000. Okay, let's just say it was 250 to 300 plus 8 years. Okay, that would,
Is that with outfitting the building?
that would be just taking the space and making it useful for our offices. Okay, so gutting, starting
At Nordhoff?
at Building C, Building C at Nordhoff, right? So let's say that's it. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other things attached that aren't part of that office requirement. But, you know, what, in essence, when you talk about the cost to the district, you would never accept a lease without a significant down payment, okay? So whatever that down payment is, you fill in the blank. I don't want to put anything out there, Andre. At some point I will, but, you know, nothing now for what a down payment might look like. But I can tell you, my suspicion is that if the goal of the board was to have no outlay of regular funds to do this, a significant portion of that down payment would be occupied by this. Okay? Now, I completely agree with Mike that we can do a lot of things to mitigate and minimize the personnel component. I don't think that's that. First of all, we don't have that many people. You know, so it's not like we're going to be hiring 30 people instead of 10. You know, so if we had to hire 2 people, it's not that big a deal because we're decentralized. So I don't, and then all those things you talked about, being able to communicate differently in the second and third plus decades of the 21st century. But the physical piece, okay, just getting there would occupy, as I said, I'll just leave it at that, a significant portion of the dollars that would come up front. Now, what would come in addition to that would be whatever the annual payment from the developer would be to have this property. So that then becomes a net add-on each year, right? Okay. So that's just how I look at it in terms of being able to afford it. We could afford it, I think, by using the down payment, or we would just make them have us afford it. We just say, you know, sorry, the down payment's not big enough, we need twice the down payment. Now, they may, whoever they are, might then step back a little bit on the annual payments, but, you know, anyway, so you see what I'm saying? So
I mean, I do, but I still, well, I mean, I do. Bottom line, you know, I just, things run through my head, like some of the things we have talked about include affordable housing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to guess that affordable housing, and you know more about this, because I know your daughter knows something about this whole area. But I'm a guess that in that scenario, you're not going to be looking at a giant down payment. That you're talking about public-private partnerships, and you're talking about, you know, tax credits, and you're talking about not an environment where you're looking at a big boatload of cash that somebody can drop off on your desk.
And maybe not something that's that enticing to the developer. You know, I mean, all of those conversations with the city, I mean, again, you all know that the environment for affordable housing in the city of Ojai is radically different in 2016 than it was in 2012. I mean, there have been, plus, well, the overlay was sort of related to that, plus landmarking. Okay, the whole environment with the city is different, and we work with them because we live in their city. Okay, I think you're right. I think that once you start putting constraints on developers for the ability to generate net income, and if that's what happens with affordable housing, I don't know. My daughter knows a lot about it. I don't, but it is different, I'm sure, than not having it. And if you,
Right.
you know, so if you could just highest bidder, regardless of the use, city says, thank you very much for doing it, that's all not happening. You know, that's different than working through the kind of requirements the city has. Because they do, and I understand it.
And I will just add one other thought, because it's a thought in my mind. I'm impressed going through all of the activity that happens on this property, that it's a pretty, you know, it's a working organism that has a whole lot of moving parts. You know, when you start thinking about a place where you can safely drive buses without potentially driving over a kid, this is perfectly set up for that. Where, you know, gasoline is off away from things, where, you know, you've got a whole high school kind of operating in here. You've got the opportunity to manage most of the important functions within this district by walking next door and having a, you know, sit down.
That's correct. Yeah, so whoever conceived it, I think did a really good job. It was, I don't know how many years ago, it was way before I came. So I think the confluence of operations here, from, you know, the youngest children in the district on through administrative operations, well, the youngest children to some of the oldest children, is really, I think, pretty cool, actually. So it'd be a fun tour.
Well, I also think, I mean, it scares me too, to think about what a developer would have to go through in order to do anything with this property, but we need to remember that that would be the case for any of the elementaries as
Sure.
well. Unless, you know, it was something simple like another school. Yeah. But, and, well, of course, half of our properties are not in the city.
More. Yeah. In fact, where am I now? Let's see. Toba's the only elementary school, Matilla and Norma. Right? And Chaparral. Yeah. And preschool. So the other elementary schools are not.
So if there's no more questions for Andy, maybe we could thank you, Andy, very much. And we'll move on
Good
to Hank's analysis of our 4 school options and what that might look like.
Okay, well, I'm going to use Thane's comment, excuse me, as a segue. We had 711 committee number 1 and 711 committee number 2, and then we don't have a committee to deal with some of the details of moving the operation. So as happens, and we're happy to have it, the committee is now Andy and I. Okay? So, you know, which is what I said would happen back several weeks ago as the 711 committee was finishing its work. So let me just say that the document that you have is, as I indicated in some notes to the board, 3 pages that at one point was about 12, 9, 6, and I tried to consolidate as much data as possible into what I hope is understandable. That having been said, without some oral presentation, particularly section 8, I'm sure the others is pretty easy to follow, but section 8 is dense. Okay, so let me just tell you what I did here. And what I tried to do was to be completely consistent with what I said I would do when the board met on April 14th and April 19th. And that is to work hard at facts, to never forget that whether there was 7-Eleven committee or not, but particularly because there was a 7-Eleven committee, never forget that an option for the future of this district is 5 elementary schools. An option. It's one of the 5 options it's outside of the 5 options, but it's always there. So we have 5 4-school options and our present configuration. So, point number 1. Point number 2, it's important to note that anytime you do an analysis of a moving target, you have to be clear on what's going on. And what's going on, as you can see in section 1, 2, and 3, and even into 4, is a moving target of total TK through 6 enrollment. So here are some numbers to keep in mind. The high point of enrollment this school year was on the first day of school, okay, which was basically, as you can see, 1,321, about 1,300 of whom are in what we call our regular classrooms. We have special day classes and a few independent studies students, basically 1,300. That number every year tends to go down some. People move out of town, some move in, but it's a lot easier to move out of Ojai than it is to move into Ojai. Okay, so we tend to lose students during the course of the year just for that reason, called life. Okay. So the more typical number you would have seen in about October through February or so look more, I'm talking about regular classroom students now, instead of 1,300, probably look more like 1,260, give or take. And so next year, at this juncture, now moving on down to Roman numeral 2, we're looking at, sort of optimistically, but I hope it's correct, about 1,220 non-special day class students, therefore needing regular classrooms. So down 80 or so from our high point, but maybe 50 or so, give or take, from our more normal number. And there's no doubt that there's going to be a decrease. We have our largest elementary class is our 6th grade by quite a bit. It's in the 220s, and we have no clue now. We can make an educated guess about what the kindergarten class might look like. TKs, of course, go across a couple of years, but almost all of the decline in elementary regular classroom enrollment is the difference between 6th graders going out and kindergartners coming in. Okay? Now I'll move on to the delinquent reports. I had to put delinquent, but you know that's where the projection came from. So remember these 2 reports that, oh, by the way, legally, when you have a 7-Eleven committee, you have to commission these reports. So the red one is the elementary classroom enrollment study. The other one was capacity. We'll get to that in a little while. So the high point of enrollment, non-special ed, regular classroom, over the next 8 to 9 years or so, or 10 years after from where they started, was about 1,400. I said at the time, I still think that's a bit on the high side. Okay, if I had to guess, crystal balling, I would say the high point in the 7 years or so after this year might look a little bit more like 1,350 or so, but let's go with what they did. And Andy pointed out, Andy knows a lot about demographic studies, and it had to do with the year they chose for birth rates and all that. But in any case, I just noted here 1,400, but it's also important to know that that doesn't happen, those last 75 don't come until the last 4 years or so of the study. So I'm looking more like the end of the decade. Okay, and the end of the decade was 1,325 non-special ed. And so what I did was I just basically took this year's high point of enrollment, which is 1,300. I didn't want to overstate the analysis, hopefully, or understate it. So I tended to go a little on the higher side, because if I told you that I thought we'd never break 1,250, and then we had 1,340, then everybody just say, well, what were they doing back in 2016? So that's what then number 4 simply says, that in the bold numbers, those are the years that, those are the numbers that I attribute to the 5 schools, no change in use of sites, in the upcoming years. Okay? And the ones in not bold are what we had this year. So basically what you can see is very simple. There's not a great deal of change at all in Miners Oaks and Miramonte. A little bit of an uptick to sort of fill out Summit with 2 classes of 25, or maybe a 23 and a 27. The reason San Antonio increases is because they have 7 classrooms, and I just filled it out. Who knows? I mean, that's just a guess. So I filled out the 7 classrooms and put another 20 there. That's not a significant piece of the analysis. It just fills out the school. And the reason Totopo's down 20 is because they're down 40 next year. Okay. So the drops we're looking at next year are 20 projected, 20 at Miners Oaks, 20 at Miramonte, 40 at Totopo. The smaller school is about the same. Okay? Now, getting into Roman numeral 5 and then 6. These are critical. And I didn't know what words to use, so I just put words in parentheses that simply said, I know I'm wrong. Okay? I just didn't want to say that, okay? Because you can't be right. You can't be correct. It's like putting 10 economists in a room or 10 weathermen in a room. You know, they're all going to be wrong. All right? So, you know, the fact is that this won't happen. It won't happen. If you make changes in the present configuration, there will be changes in both intra-district and inter-district enrollment. There will be. But I'm not going to try to put a number on it. Okay? I said at the 711 committee, in my opinion, there will be a decrease of inter-district enrollment. I can't tell you how much, but I think there will be because the stasis will be interrupted. You know, people have become used to, if I live here in Oakview and I have friends in the valley and I play sports, and now my older brother went, you know, to Miramonte or Miners Oaks because it's near there, I want to go there too. Oh, wait a minute, it's not there anymore. Well, then I have to decide, am I going to go to the other one? Okay, that's just different. It doesn't make it worse or better as a school setting, it's just different. And I think that will change. Similarly, there's no doubt in my mind if we close Summit that some portion of the 10 to 15 or whatever the number is of students from Santa Paula that has become sort of stasis won't come. Some will stay. Maybe some other ones will come. You know, if the place to go, remember I used proximity here as a criterion, is now San Antonio. I think there would be some decrease from Santa Paula, but I can't tell you the number. Now, as far as intra-district is concerned, that's a really interesting one. Because, just because you know outtake. You know, we also have, you take a look at any chart that we've developed, you know, the number of students intra-district, you know, it has been so stable between 30% and 33% of the total enrollment elementary TK through 6 in the last 4 years. I mean, it's just who we are. Okay, the other thing you need to know is over 40% of the students who are in our elementary schools, let's call it 1,300, over 40% are either intra-district or inter-district. Right? And one of the things that I want to find out, right, one of the things I'm going to find out, and is my Moorpark guy, so we're going to find out about Moorpark, but some other places, I want to get a sense of just how unique that is. Okay? I'm going to bet we're on the high end. Okay, but there's some districts that are more internal, both not having the impact of inter-district. Now, I mean, the king of inter-district enrollment is Oak Park. Now, they're off the charts, okay, because their proximity to LA and some very large districts absolutely helps them. So I'm not quite talking about them, but there'll be others that we can check. So I'm interested in that. So I want to be able to report to you just how, let's use the word unique, because everybody, I think I've told you every place I've ever been things are unique. But in this case, we may well be. And I want you to understand that. All right, so point number 1 on number 5 won't happen. But I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about it. Point number 2, this is huge. It's huge. And you'll see why when I get to section 8. Okay? It's this whole proximity concept, right? If you close a school and you're trying to retain, remember the underlying piece here is, you know, what's a reasonable number these days, Andy? $8,000 a student, give or take? Every student net you lose, that's $8,000 you don't have, okay? It doesn't take a lot of $8,000 to get to the total savings, top-end savings that the 7-Eleven committee found in closing a school, which is about $240,000, I'll round it off, because it's easy. It's only 30 kids, right? 30 net loss. So if it's just financial, you can do your own math. However, this issue, in my mind, is not just financial. In fact, one thing the 7-Eleven committee members, I think, learned early on and then kept learning about it was that other than Measure J funds, there is no financial impetus to do this. I'm telling you, and that discounts unfairly how much $200,000 means to us. Okay. Yes, it does mean 1.5% in compensation, but that's not enough. It's not enough all by itself to do this. Okay. I agree with that, if you want to call it a conclusion, that the committee reached. Okay. We have many $200,000 components in a $25 million budget. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not, in my opinion, the only answer. Right? So that's really important. And then Section 6, I don't know what else to call it except a critical question. If you close a school, particularly one of the 3 large schools, and you then move students from, let's take the 3 situations. You close Miramani and you move the students to Miners Oaks and Topa Topa, and then you move some kids from Topa Topa to San Antonio. How are you going to decide who gets to go to the next school? Okay? If you're also trying to maximize the number of inter-district students that you have and the number of intra-district students that you want to be able to satisfy, because it's a big part of what we do. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. So how would we all determine that? I think that's a critical question. That's why I wrote that. Okay? On to Section 6. I just wanted to sort of get some numbers out in front of you. The 5 schools, again, according to the work of the 7-Eleven committee, just remember the large schools have between 25 and 27 classrooms. Yes, some of them are not in good shape. We're not using those classrooms, but we have them. Okay? So just in terms of capacity, I put 22 on each of the large schools, and there'll be a few not used. San Antonio filled it up. Some it actually could have been 4. There are 4 classrooms there. I simply stayed with 2 because there hasn't been a situation since I've been here where there has been a demand, even when we had 3 teachers and Santa Paula was more open, that's right, Dirk, of having their students come post January 1st because we're a district of choice. There just hasn't been 100 students. So I could have put 3, I just put 2. It's not a big deal. It could be 3, and then we just have space for 25 more students. Give you a sense, Kevin, you raised this question a couple of meetings ago. Just to give you a sense of what it means educationally, we can talk about the impact of that. I'm going to be meeting with the faculties, elementary faculties, in the upcoming weeks because I want to hear directly from them about this issue of a life with combination classes and without. And the without would be with the certainty of at least 2 colleagues in your grade, in your school, with the potential of 3 sometimes. Okay, and that's really what these paragraphs are saying. All right, that San Antonio filled up would have 7 classes, TK through 6, 1 class per grade. Let's just leave it at that. I'm not calling a TKK combination right now because we have so few TK kids, but you know what I'm talking about. So we have 12 of those combination classes now, non-TK. We could have a life of 2. The 2 at Summit. That could be our life. With a certain construction of elementary schools.
And it also looks like you're giving fewer kids in the classrooms. That's just because we were.
I just used 25. Right now, if you just divided 1,300 by 46.6, you're in that 27.8 range. I just used 25 because that's exactly what was in this report. Okay, so if the number went up, we wouldn't need as many classrooms. And if the class size went up, few less, it's not that big a change. We now use 47 classrooms, so call it 46, and then we have a separate TK classroom at Miramati because we had this huge demand, 19 kids. And then, of course, we have lots of other uses, right? That's what I put here, our special day classes, a couple of classes at Miners Oaks and some other places. And then we have Parkinson's Law. Right? Space will be used if space is available.
Yeah.
Right, and, no, not Murphy's Law, it's Parkinson's Law.
Oh, okay.
We try to stay away from Murphy's Law.
Okay.
Anyway, but in any case, anyway, so, and I've been in, I think, every classroom and seen how they're used, and it's great to have that space. Okay, so that, before I get to 8, any questions on 1 through 7?
Yes.
No.
So only if we close one of the large schools do we get that lack of accommodation.
Right, the closure of San Antonio, moving present numbers, well, moving 155. You move 155 students, some to Summit, a few to get to 50. That takes off 10. Of the 145 distributed among the other schools, I would argue where they live. Okay, you might get. It's impossible to know, but you might get a marginal decrease in combination classes. If you happen to kick over, right, if you put 25 more kids in the right grades, right, you might then have a need to have 2 teachers in each of the adjoining grades, as opposed to 3 between them. But it's impossible to know. There's just not enough students if San Antonio closes, and if Summit closes, for sure not. Because that would theoretically fill up San Antonio plus a little, right? Okay? Yeah, I mean, and that's what aid is all about. By closing, rounding off. 275, Miners Oaks with 275, Miramati at 375, Topa Topa at 425, and then moving those students into predominantly the open 2 larger elementary schools to get to 500 plus. That's how you get 75 or so, 80 per grade, and that's how you get 3 or 4 sections per grade in this school. Does that make sense? Okay.
I know you prepared this months ago, but I don't recall the details. As I recall, when we did the historical analysis of population, that about 20 years ago, we had twice as many students.
Not that many. We had so now we're getting close to 20, that's true. We're at the 19-year mark. At the 19-year mark, we had 4,200 students district-wide. Now we have 2,600, so you can extrapolate down, 40% less or so. And I could go back and see if there's any distinguishing number between elementary and secondary, but I don't think there is. So I figure 40% more.
I mean, that's when we came into the story. So
Right.
I remember being at that high point and coming down. What I don't remember, and I don't remember if our numbers went back far enough, but prior to that.
We talked about that in a meeting earlier today. I've seen that chart, and I can tell you that, I can't give you the year, let's call it 60s or something like that, okay? 70s, whatever, that range or so. There were years where the Ohio Unified School District was very similar in size to what we are now. Very similar. And I'll get that. I've seen it, I just gotta find it.
So in the back of my mind, I don't know that anybody in the 60s would have predicted that bump. And we're sitting today where I just have to say, I have zero confidence in the predictions out beyond 5 years. Absolutely zero confidence.
Well, you heard me
Yeah.
being skeptical.
Right,
Okay.
right. I mean, the kids haven't been born yet, and, so,
That's why I
in my
tried.
mind, we have a 50-50 shot of going back to where we were, or going down even farther.
Yeah, well, that's why I didn't pick 1,400, and I didn't pick 1,200. I said, might as well pick one in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, so, anyway, so I am very confident that if the board chose any one of the 6 options in this document, 5 schools, or any one of the 4 school options, or for that matter, depending on how you did it, a 3-school option, with or without moving the sixth grade, which also, by the way, was in the 7-11 committee report as an issue discussed but not resolved. You know, we've discussed it, okay? So remember, as you're doing your own mental gymnastics here, whatever these numbers are, just divide it by 7. And if you took out the sixth grade, then that creates more space, right? So any other questions or comments about 1 through 7?
So I'm surprised that you appear to be guaranteeing that there will be no combo classes if we were to close a school, because it seems to me...
Large school?
Yeah, if we close a large school.
Absolutely.
Because it seems to me you still could potentially end up with a situation where, like, you know, that tweaking that you have to do every year, and you go, you know what? It's going to be a lot better. I talked to Ando. We're going to have a combo because, you know, I mean, because otherwise we're going to have a 32 kids in one class and blah, blah, blah. You know, it seems like...
It's okay. I'll say it's on the edge of absolutely guaranteeing, okay? But I don't see a situation, well, certainly compared to where we are now, I don't see a situation when you have 530 kids that you could figure out, that you couldn't figure out some way to have straight classes if you wanted to. Well, what would happen, and that option is there, but to me, it would only occur through a direct conversation among both teachers and the principal, right? Because it was the best thing to do. But, you know, what I would see is, for example, if you wanted to have all classes non-combination classes, you could have the one grade averaging 23 and the next higher grade averaging 29, as opposed to the two together averaging 26. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think it's a fair projection to say that in almost every case, you would not have a need for combination classes.
But I also think that it's important to highlight Roman numeral 6, which is the critical question about how you deal with intra-district transfers. Because the reality is, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, if we today, without closing a school, applied a different approach to intra-district transfer and instead said, I'm sorry, we're going to tell you, or at least on a margin, tell you where you have to go because we don't want combo classes. I assume you could achieve something similar by bringing kids where you need them and taking them away from where you have too many across the district if this combo class thing, you know, was something that you desperately wanted to avoid.
Yeah, we could. I would say that, and I know this has come up in another very legitimate concern about, here we are, I don't know, 20 years later or 15 years later, how many years after a prior board, superintendent, et cetera, implemented the intra-district program, right? And so certainly from March 3rd, 10th, and 17th, and other conversations of the type, you know, that we've had, there's some concern centered, in this case at Miners Oaks, that the result is a disproportionate number of students who have numerically left. And to some extent, the ethnicity issue goes with it. Okay? True, all true. The flip side is that we're serving all families equally. So anybody who wants to move to another place may do so. Now, I can tell you, since I'm the one that has implemented the program of saying yes or no to people moving, I could probably count on 2 hands, maybe one, the number of times in 7 years that I've said, you may not go to that school for any reason other than numbers, okay? And the numbers don't really have anything to do with combination classes. It has to do with the size of the class, the size of the grade in that school. So if we're already at 32 in 2 sections in let's just say, forget combination classes, 32 each, there's a very high certainty that I will not say yes to the 65th family. You just need to go someplace else, okay? That's a part of the issue. The other thing is, I have to tell you that while I understand that we, by our structure of having small elementary schools, including, I don't know, even Miramonte is sort of small, you know, compared to, certainly for 7 grades, compared to Ventura County schools. I've said it from this chair and so many other times, I marvel and I've seen, I think, every implementation of it, I marvel at how wonderfully well our teachers implement a combination class.
Well, yeah.
It's really pretty cool. I mean, I don't even know how they do it, because when I taught juniors and seniors in high school, it was hard enough to teach kids with different abilities in the same course, and they're teaching fourth graders on this side of the aisle and third graders on that side. It's just hard. So I don't think this whole analysis revolves around finance. I don't think it all revolves around limiting combination classes. I don't think it all revolves around having 2 or 3 colleagues in the same grade, in the same school. I don't think it revolves around intra-district or inter-district flow, but all of those are pieces of the puzzle. And Andy's analysis. Although even that, if we decentralize the way we talked about it, I'm positive we could figure out a way to do all of our district office operations in 5 elementary schools. Okay? Now, would it be helpful to be able to go into one school? Yeah, I would. But there's no way I would make the decision based on that.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's what I'm trying to tell you. There are so many moving parts here, but combination classes, I just put it in there because, well, you asked about it and it came up, I don't know, Andy, what do you think? 5 or 6 meetings during the 7-11? It just came up. So I wanted to put it in there. Okay.
Well, I want to be clear. My kids have been in 4 combo classes, and
Yeah.
we thought they're great.
Right.
And my daughter's in the back. I think she's actually reading.
Or not falling asleep. Yeah.
But-
brothers like elbowing her.
But I wanted to highlight this inter-district transfer concept because when you close a school, I mean, you make a presumption, which I agree with, which is that if you close a school, you give total priority to every one of those kids who no longer have the school of their choice to choose wherever in our district they want to go.
Yeah.
And if that were to occur, presumably you might have to start saying to some other people who choose, like I live in the San Antonio district, I choose Topa Topa. You might say to me, sorry, we just closed the school. Those guys get priority. You guys have been going to Topa for 10 years. You now have to go to San Antonio. So
Exactly.
that's a big change in how our school district is run.
Yeah.
No doubt, that's why I wrote it the way I wrote it.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't, other than putting like bells and whistles on it, I don't
Yeah,
think
no,
I
I
could have
appreciate
been any
the
more
way you
direct.
wrote it, yeah.
Okay, any other questions on 1 through 7? And I'm not going to go through every part of number 8, but I do want you to understand what I'm trying to do here.
But it's not a given that happens.
No, there's no givens here.
Because it could be that, well, if you're already there, you can stay, but if you're a new family, we don't have room for you. I mean, who knows how it would.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Well, I think we would all agree if
Consideration.
you're closing a school, you would want to give those people priority to change. I mean, I can't imagine.
You mean already
otherwise.
there, meaning the
Like,
intra-district?
so if you're at Topa Topa and they close
Topa Topa.
Miramani or Miners Oaks, and so there's students coming to Topa Topa, and Topa Topa's more crowded, they wouldn't allow maybe I don't know, I would sort of think new students to come to Topa Topa from San Antonio.
Yeah, you're struggling with it, aren't
Students
you?
who were
That's
already
right.
there. I mean, hopefully.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
All right,
struggle,
I
I
got it.
struggled, I told you, that's how,
But it's not a given. What he just said was that he would be forced back to San Antonio.
No,
No.
I'm not saying it's a given. Hopefully I have some juice around here, so.
I think that you would, with a closed school, you would find powerfully convincing arguments from the families in that closed school that somehow, some way, whether it's, well, somehow, some way or ways, they should have priority to decide where they're going to school. Whether it's intra-district or in a particular contiguous attendance area, okay? And that was what I was trying to get at, and the reason why I did 8 the way I did it was almost to show you what happens if you do the opposite, okay? Because what I've done in number 8 throughout, I'll get to sort of how I did it, is to show you what happens if you accommodate, if one of your criteria, or two criteria, are to keep all the intra-district opportunities and flexibilities that we have, and keep all the students inter-district for financial reasons predominantly, then you can see what happens in terms of available space or not in the schools. And so what I've done here, number 8, was to show you, those 5 options, just alphabetically. And what you can see here is that, and remember, like I said here, some of these numbers don't add up perfectly, so don't try to add everything up and make it 550, because it's not going to happen. But you can see what happens if you close, for example, Miners Oaks. You have to distribute 273 students from this year, of whom 83 are either intra-district or inter-district. And now you can see what I did, all right? So, I quote, filled up Miramonte, took their present, I'm just rounding off now, present 380, took the 37 intra-district from Miners Oaks that doesn't exist anymore, and put them at Miramonte, took the 28 inter-district from Miners Oaks that doesn't exist anymore, put them in Miramonte, and then 100 of the 190 others who live in the Miners Oaks attendance area. Therefore, we still must place about 100, 90, 100, okay? Where do they go? Well, you'll see eventually they would go to Topa Topa. Okay? So you would take, and same thing's gonna happen in Miramonte in a minute. So you take this almost 300 student contingent with almost 100 of them either intra-district or inter-district, figure out where to put them, then say, okay, we just talked about, then say to the other 2/3 or so of the Miners Oaks community, you're either going to go to Miramonte or Topa Topa. If we put the 83 at Miramonte. But if we don't, then we have more space for the Miners Oaks students to go to Miramonte, but we may well not have inter-district kids, and we then are limiting our flexibility for intra-district. Okay?
But it's less likely that all intros would want to go to Miramonte if they're from San Antonio or I see 7 students from San Antonio
Yeah.
district going to Miners Oaks. If you close Miners Oaks, the likelihood of them wanting to go to Miramonte versus back to San Antonio.
Right. The 2/3 or so, good point, 2/3 or so of the 55 inter-district students at Miners Oaks are from Miramonte. Okay? So you're only having to accommodate 18 others, right? But what about the inter-district kids? Right? So now you have 28 inter-district kids who were at Miners Oaks. Will they want to go to Miramonte? And then we have the same question in each situation. So you can see then that when you have 275 students to distribute, you could almost put all of the Miners Oaks students at Miramonte at 381. Well, now you're over 650. You'd have to figure out some way to limit that, or just have Miramonte be an exceptionally large school, which sort of could work, except we've already run out of classrooms at some point. And then you can just see what happens in the rest of the district. Predominantly, the impact would be at Topa Topa for theoretically picking up the 1/3 of the students from Miners Oaks for whom there wouldn't be space if you followed this concept at Miramonte. Now you go to B. I'm not going to go to every single one, but you can see then we're talking about another 100 students or so that need placement, and of the 381 students, 172 are either intra-district or inter-district. Okay, you sort of follow the plan now, right? I'm not going to do every one because I hate it when people do that. So, you got 136 of the 209 Miramonte. I mean, Miramonte only has 209 students who live in the Miramonte district, attendance area, not district, attendance area, right? So only about half, a little over half of the students who go to Miramonte live in that attendance area. You have almost as many intra-district and inter-district combined as you have students who live in that attendance area. And, okay, so then you can see what would happen. Now you're making 2 large schools. They happen to be Miners Oaks and Topa Topa. San Antonio and Summit are static, if you will, 175 and 50. And now you can see we're going to have to place, 2/3 or so of the Miramonte students who can't go to Miners Oaks if you're finding space for all the intra-district kids from Miners Oaks and the 59 inter-district, and those students would go to Topa Topa. That's B. C, much more straightforward. I moved some students, from San Antonio to Summit, 15 intra-districts, and that sort of made Summit a larger entity. And then you already know that 2/3 of the students who go to San Antonio do not live there. So we're talking about students going back to their home school, right, in San Antonio, and placing 41 others. And I just put them in Topatopa because of the proximity. Summit, I think, is straightforward. And one of the questions is at San Antonio, regarding preference for in-district students. If we want to maintain that relationship with Santa Paula, who gets to go to San Antonio? And then finally, Topatopa is maybe the most interesting challenge in part because it's largest. They have about the same number of combination of intra-district and inter-district students as Miramonte does. The reason why it's maybe the most interesting is because it's the farthest east, right, of the 3 largest schools, so now you're just moving everybody this way. Whereas distributing either Miramonte or Miners Oaks is geographically maybe a little easier. And I think, again, I sat in on all the 7-Eleven committee meetings. I'm positive that one of the reasons why Miners Oaks was chosen, actually there were 2 overriding reasons, which then we all learned a lot after the choice, or the decision of March 3rd. One was that it sits between, not by a lot, but it sits between Miramonte and Topatopa. And I've seen in many other districts with different conditions, when you have a school, more typically it's like equidistant from 2 schools, and there are natural boundaries like a big highway or something. So if you live on that side of the highway and you go to the school, you go to that, when you close the school in the middle, you go to that school, and on this side of the highway, you go to that school. Well, that doesn't exist, right? Okay. So one reason was that it sits between them. Again, not by a lot. The second is that it was the smallest of the 3, or smaller than Miramonte by 100 students. Okay? And obviously, that's why you have public hearings. Other criteria came forth. And then the committee on the 10th, as I recall, 10th and 17th, whichever those were, when the final vote took place, it's called the 17th, reversed the vote of March 3rd, right, to unanimously not close Miners Oaks. And my last point of this is, I get that, completely get it. And then the second vote was 7-4, not to keep all the schools open, therefore 4 not. And at some point, I'm probably going to sit down with each of the 4 and say, pick one. Now, I'd like to know. Now, if you look at their statements,
They said pretty much.
yeah, they said it, but I want to talk to them a little more. Okay. I mean, I understand the votes to not close. Get it? Always have. But I want to just talk a little bit more, because I don't think I need to talk with those 7. I understand that. Okay. And it was well articulated throughout. I do want to talk with the 4 to understand, because in 3 of the cases it was pretty clear, but in 1 not. Okay. So I just want to, now that I've done some analysis, I'm going to show them this, and I want to understand how that person would implement closure.
If that was the choice.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'd like to talk to the 4. I'd like to understand their thinking. Okay?
Well, and I think that's the process. I mean, at an earlier meeting, before they were discussing individual schools, I think it was more like 6-5 in favor of closing a school, or even 5-6.
Well, the formal vote on March 3rd.
But just when that first time, okay, state your opinion.
Oh, yeah.
When everyone was reading, just before we get started on trying to find a motion. It was earlier, it was in February, I was in the back, and there was significantly more than
I can't remember the straw vote on that one. But I would say, if I had to walking away from the 7-Eleven committee, well, let's take a look at the 2 7-Eleven committees. In March of 2012, the vote was 9-1 to recommend the board lease or sell all or part of the property. Okay, and I thought the 1 person was convincing. I understood that person's view. I would say I walk away from the 7-Eleven committee on the issue of closing a school or schools, I think it's fair to say somewhat split, but obviously a majority not to do either one. That was the decision. Okay, so, and the 7-Eleven committee was advisory. I mean, one person said to me, well, you know, and you know how much time I spent watching those committee meetings and throwing bouquets and accolades at the committee, which I think they deserve. But if someone said, well, that was their recommendation, why aren't you just doing it? Okay, understand that. And then I said, well, let's say they had recommended closing your school. Would you be saying the same thing? Well, that was a conversation ender. You know, so, you know, that's why I'm getting paid the big bucks and you're here, you know, that kind of thing. So that's my report. Any questions on Section 8?
It's pretty clear, I think.
Thank you, the explanation helped.
I would just like to hear your input on a question.
Sure.
It seems like when I look at these numbers, and it was really interesting to take a look at these numbers, that if we were to have a growth spurt, it looks like we're about one class away from having too much capacity at any of these schools. If we close a school. So if we close a school, if we close a large school.
Oh.
Yeah, not Summit or San Antonio, but if we close one of the other 3 schools, we're moving all the students to the other schools. And then we have a margin of, 30, 40, 50 students to hit capacity.
But that's also without moving to 6th grade.
Right.
Right, and that is an answer. In the committee, talk about overwhelming, after some significant analysis, view of a community committee. It wasn't a 7-Eleven committee, but we had 20 people on the committee, and the statement was, by 17 of the 20, that our program, let's call it grades 6 through 8, after extending all kinds of compliments, very sincere compliments to our present 6th grade teachers, that our program would be stronger with the 6th grade, with the 7th and 8th graders. So, again, that's for another time.
That's a good.
It's for another time, okay?
Right, but that's a
it
good
was
response
there.
to the question.
Well, thank you, it was there. Okay. All right, so then, but the second piece is, I don't feel we're anywhere near having to worry about, well, first of all, I don't think there will be 1,600 TK through 6th graders at any point in our futures here. I just don't. I don't see a whole bunch of 800 home developments coming in, which generates those kind of numbers. I know they're talking about a big one in Santa Paula. We don't have, we have space, but they're all used by farmers. I don't see them selling those off. And I have been in a school district that did that. So that's why I said I don't think we need to worry about more than 1,400. But I'm with you on demographic studies. We have to do them, but if they're not born yet, I'm not convinced. Okay, so that's just where I am. I don't think I have to worry about that. Plus, if you wanted to keep the 6th graders on campus and you were using 22 of 25 classrooms and that felt cramped, there are all kinds of ways to bring in other classrooms. Okay, and our elementary schools, well, even they're all, but the 3 large ones are really big. I mean, we have so much field space.
Yeah.
We talked about that.
We're used to space here.
I got it, okay. We have plenty of room for mobile classrooms, I mean like the 21st century type, not the ones that we're having to figure out how to set them aside. So I wouldn't worry about that. There's so many other things I'd worry about other than that. Okay, I wouldn't worry about that.
Drought, stuff like that.
Other questions for tonight? I mean, we're gonna have many shots at this, I know. But,
One question I have is what can we do right now that would increase income for the district?
well, there were a bunch of...
There were some
yeah.
suggestions, and how many schools institute Saturday school, for example?
Could I put that on the 17th?
Sure.
because Andy's starting to study it, he's made some calls, we've had some members of the community who've been very helpful in giving us leads.
I just have to say, because I was involved in a lot of Saturday schools, both at Topa Topa and I've been to a couple at Miners Oaks. You know, Saturdays are soccer games and flag football and Little League, and, you know, it might be a great idea, but I don't know how many families can actually take advantage of that.
Right.
There are basketball games in the winter, there's always something going on for families. And it's, again, staffing it was difficult, finding the teachers and the parents even to volunteer to do it. So it's not a, it's, I mean, I know the 7-Eleven committee loved it, but I don't know that any of them were actually involved in it and how difficult it was to pull off.
The term that I heard today in a really excellent meeting Andy and I had with a member of the community about that was I don't know where this came from, but I understand the term. The term was driver, as in zealot. You need someone at the school to be a zealot for this, okay? You know, you organize it, you get the people there, you get the teach. First of all, teachers, oh, by the way, really like Saturdays. I mean, I would not, I love teaching, and I coached on Saturdays. If you asked me to come back and teach political science on Saturday? Anyway, so, you know, so all of the above. It isn't a panacea, but they didn't say it was. I mean, they weren't saying, you know, you will solve your financial problems by having Saturday schools. Or grants. And one member who happened to sit here every time, one member of the committee kept reminding everybody, grants come and go. I get that. And also, by the way, if you hire people through grants, there is a strong belief that when the grant leaves, that person should continue. And you know who funds that.
Yeah.
Okay? So, I'm going to tell you flat out, as complimentary as I've been to the 7-Eleven committee, when we get to March 17th, I'm going to go through in a different, because you wanted to do 2 hours, we're getting there, past there. I'm going to go through some of those recommendations. I'm just going to give you my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm not far from you on this one. I think we should try it. But as Mary Ann said, who was sitting over there, just remember, and she was a real strong advocate for doing these income generating things, just remember, we are understaffed administratively. All right? And so that's why you need a zealot. Okay? So, you know, if the kids want it, the parents want it, and we can do it without taxing more our staff, I think it's worth looking at. And Andy's done some research, and you'll hear, I think, top end net revenue, I'm sorry, net add-on to the budget, right, revenue minus cost. You'll hear his analysis after talking to some people. Better to have it than not the answer, but it wasn't projected that way.
I think that might be a good thing, you know, as a closing thought, we can send our suggestions, the questions that we want to have answered at the March 17th.
I'd really like to do that. And then, you know, what we can do, after we do that, then you can decide, okay, well, then what's next? You know,
Yeah.
another special meeting to do what?
Right.
Right?
We'll have more information and.
Right, because there were something like necessary small schools and things like that that I.
Well, we have that number now, we know what that is.
Yeah.
So if I could talk about it amongst us, though, they
Exactly.
talked about it. and
Yeah, exactly.
maybe
Well, that's what tonight was about, to start getting you integrated with the analysis of these two issues.
I just had a thought, you had talked about meeting with teachers
Mhm.
about their.
I wanna do that.
about the-
I would do that.
If those are meetings that would be conducive to our attending.
Sure,
If I'm available, I would love to
Yeah.
hear that. Because to me, there were two things that I found really compelling about all of the analysis out of the 7-Eleven committee, and the one was that I was really convinced that we could serve our students educationally better if we had more together on a single campus. I felt that was a strong argument. And then the other, that we're not using all of our facilities. It doesn't mean we need to close the school necessarily, but we're not using all of our buildings.
Right.
So those were the two things those were my takeaways. And I kind of think as we have this discussion, addressing those concerns directly might make more sense than addressing them indirectly.
Well, for example, one of the things, you picked the school, didn't it? Of the 3 large schools, Topa Topa is the most fully utilized because they have more kids, okay? But one of the things that I want to do before you come to your conclusion is to have a tour. So when you see numbers here, right? So we have 10 teachers at Miners Oaks. We have 26 classrooms. And you say, oh, what the heck? I mean, are you kidding me? Yeah, but doesn't tell the story.
Right.
I mean, you need to see, first of all, we have this area over here that's like not used. So with the recommendations of these 4 classrooms sitting out there, right, that would recommend take out. So now we're down to 22. We're still not talking about 12 classrooms not used. So you need to get a sense of what that means, what that distance is between regular classrooms and total classrooms. So when you talk to people in the community and they say, what we asked before? Yeah, you're down 40%. Or, as Craig pointed out, I'll give him, certainly, he's right. General Motors, I'm not sure that's necessarily the most, I'm not sure it's exactly what I think about every morning, but, in terms of comparability, but he's right. It's a legitimate question.
As an elementary school student, we went on tours up the GM factory in Van Nuys, which
Okay.
I think Michael Jackson was going to buy that. I'm not sure what he was going to do with it, but no longer there.
All right, any other questions?
Okay, I think
I have a little something.
Sure.
So along the lines of what the thing was just talking about, I've seen or I've heard, I think, the potential justification for closing an elementary school, seemingly to me, changing periodically. Because from my perspective, and certainly from Craig Andrews' perspective, this is all about finances. So from some, I think, teachers' perspective, it's all about finances. This is all about a school district that has no business running an extra elementary school, and that if we were to close it, we would achieve all these efficiencies. So it doesn't sound like, at least collectively, we think that that's the issue right now. If, in fact, we are serious about the educational aspects of closing a school and potentially closing a school for educational reasons, then I think we need a lot more input from parents. I've hardly heard any input from parents. I've heard input from Miners Oaks parents, but I want to hear more input from parents. I mean, I'm a parent who had kids in a combo class. I like combo classes, so that's some input. If we're closing for that, or what is the reason? And then we also have an issue that I brought up last time, which is I'd like to know more about how the on-the-ground reality at a Topa Topa with 550 students will be. Mm-hmm. Maybe it once was like that. Jane was mentioning, that to me once, that some of these schools have been running at a much higher capacity. But if in fact we're seriously considering closing a school and running schools at this much higher capacity, I'd like to know how that will affect the lives of the kids on the ground. And I think the parents certainly will want to know that as well.
Well, one thing we can do, I don't want to go too long, but I can do this quickly. January 7th, I'm thinking, give or take a couple of days, meeting of the 7-Eleven committee. Before winter break, the 7-Eleven committee asked exactly that question. And they had asked me, because I was in the audience back in November or something, what I thought about these larger school settings. So I gave them my opinion. It hasn't changed. I'll replicate that at another time. But then I said, well, let's hear from the principals, because at least I can get 5 of them there, 4 principals in Maryland. Okay? And we had the conversation. And so at another special meeting after May 17th, for example, we could replicate that and ask as many faculty members to come as would want to be part of a conversation, which you can do at a special meeting easily. Okay? Tonight was a little more formal because we had 2 big reports. So we can do that, but I'm just thinking, I can tell you exactly what happened that night. Okay, what happened that night was Don Damianos was able to remember what Miners Oaks was like at 600 plus kids 20 years ago. Catherine Wright was able to do the same thing in Miramonte. Okay? And Cheryl Knox, who might be the most interesting person to respond to what you're saying, was the principal of a 650 K through 6 elementary school in Simi Valley. Now she's the principal of a 450 to 500 student school here. So she could tell you in reality at least what it's like to have almost 200 more kids, K-6, and then project what it might be like at Topa Topa, for example, with 100 more students.
Well, remember, I asked that question, Glenn himself. I'm asking, I think, slightly differently, because I'm asking more in the context of something that Andy might put together, similar to what he put together for, IT leaving this campus, or, MOT leaving this campus. In other words, okay, what's our infrastructure for meals?
Yep.
What's our, it's been brought up by several people, but I think it's totally legit, playground equipment, the reality of
All
a
those are
bigger reality, and what that will actually mean. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anecdotal, I've been at a bigger school and it has benefits. I know, I've heard that
You're
stuff.
talking about with our situation.
I'm talking about with our situation, and particularly with respect to the infrastructure and the, just those kinds of day-to-day moments that are really, how you live your
I
life.
think that's a really great point, and remember, you're talking about a matter of degree also. So if you're talking about the change in life at Miners Oaks would be radically more than the change in life at Topa Topa, right? Right? So you're going from 275 to double that.
Well, I think it may be, that meeting we had last March, where we sort of said, in general, how would you feel? I feel like that's, because to me, when you say that, I think, okay, if we closed Topa Topa and sent those students elsewhere, you would have to say to the principal, well, now instead of 250 students, you have 500 students. What would you, okay, well, instead of 2 recesses, we would have 3 recesses. And so there's less time. So even though we have, those are very specific, and it wouldn't be just about recess and lunch. It would have to be about a lot of things. So I think I'm feeling it's a waste of time to do that if we're not even considering. Like if all of us were to look at this and go, boy, I hate item, F, then why do the analysis of F if we don't like it?
Or would you want to hear that to help you decide how you felt about F? I think that's a great point. And what you're talking about is, how would the school look and operate? I'm just talking about academics now. There's so many more things about it, okay? Buses and as you said, recess and the critical parts of schooling, right? Recess and lunch, right? So, and getting there and getting home, right? So I guess I would only ask you to think about, maybe for 2 weeks from now, what do you want to know more about before you can take a position to say no to that or no to all of them? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I really think that's a great point, because, and that is what we talked about briefly on January 7th. Okay, that's what we did. We talked about it.
So let me pile on a little bit, because the other benefit that I heard was the academic benefit.
Yeah, that's what I
right?
talked about a
The
little bit.
leveraging of
Yeah.
resources and backstopping of teachers. And what I really heard was a resource allocation issue. And I'm not sure that I'm right.
Tell me what you mean by resource allocation.
Well, when I hear we'd have, more supplies, we'd have more, what I'm hearing is, is it the consolidation that gets us that, or is it just that the resources that we have then go farther? And if we had maybe a little more resources, would we still need the benefits of the consolidation?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Clear?
I know what you mean, and
Okay.
that really wasn't the focus. I would say, for example, let's just say we have 180 students or so. Well, call it 200. We have 200 students in a typical grade. 200 would give us 2,600 kids. 200, right? And among those 200 in grade X, pick it, let's say a middle grade, third grade, we would have probably 7 teachers would be a little on the high side right now. 7 to 8 teachers, okay? All we're saying is that instead of having 7 or 8 teachers in 5 places, we'd have 7 or 8 teachers in 4 places, okay? And in 2 of those 4, we would have 3 teachers or so working together. No more resources, they just all are in the same place.
Right.
Okay, you talk about leveraging, If that's what leveraging means, yes, that's true. So instead of having, manipulatives in all these places, you have more manipulatives in one place.
Right,
You
right.
still have the same number, theoretically, computers, textbooks, and people. Okay, they just happen to be together. Okay, and,
So here's my question.
Yeah.
I think I know how to express it.
okay.
Are you getting new synergies then by bringing people together?
Yes.
Or is that just?
I believe,
Okay.
and I said I'm not going to change my opinion. I believe the answer is yes. But again, it's not the only criteria.
Right.
I do believe, if I ask someone, if you just figure we didn't have 5 schools, and I asked you on September 1st, if you picked the year, to wave a wand over 1,250 K through 6 students, what would you do with them? Where would you put them? What kind of schools would you construct? Well, that is so beyond hypothetical, right? Because that's not the case. We're sitting with schools that are, well, on average 75 years old or so, and the construction of the K-6 environment in 5 places that's been around for a really long time. What we're talking about is, are the arguments powerful enough for change, right, to create a different construction of those 1,300 students with all of the issues that are attending to that? That's what tonight starts to be about.
Yeah.
I think it's, earlier Kevin asked about the guarantee on the combo classes, and it made me think, it made me put some things together in my head. My kids were at Topa Topa when we were at the peak,
Yeah.
or very close to the peak, and we still had combo classes.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Shout out to Mrs. Dvorak, who did a great job, and we were really happy.
I don't know what the numbers were, but, I would
But,
say in general, that would not be necessary.
Yeah. Well, we would have to construct it that way, right? But it's not a panacea, just to put them all together.
I know.
Things still happen.
I do think, though, again, if you just take the emotions out of it, which are absolutely impossible to do, and if you were to ask a cross-section of teachers, just forget about closing school or not closing school, just on the subject of, if you could pick two lives in the next 10 years, working as a single practitioner in your grade in your school, or working with one, at the most one other, or in some years, working with a person who also has responsibilities for another grade. It's option 1. Option 2, working with 2 other teachers in that grade only in your school. If you hypothetically could take out all of the other issues, I believe the latter would be rather strongly supported. I mean, I've seen it, I know it, I think I know it, but I'm going to talk to some teachers, and they're just going to have to believe me that if they tell me that that's true, that doesn't mean I'm going to come back to you and recommend closing the school, because that's just not the case.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? We can all write to the 2 of you.
Absolutely,
this week.
absolutely.
And, I think we've covered a lot. Our brains are completely fried with all this information.
That was our purpose, that's what we wanted to do.
Wow, you guys did a great job. So with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.